The person who wounded you the deepest probably did it inside a building with a cross on the wall. And that wound didn't just hurt your feelings. It fractured something between you and God that you've been quietly grieving ever since. You walked away from a church, maybe from all churches, and somewhere in the silence you started wondering if you walked away from God too. By the end of this, you'll understand why that fracture was never what you thought it was. Church hurt carries a specific kind of weight. A coworker betrays you and you change jobs. A friend lies to you and you find new friends. But when someone who claimed to speak for God uses that authority to shame you, exclude you, manipulate you, or dismiss your pain, the damage reaches a different layer. Because the betrayal gets tangled up with your image of God Himself. The pastor who controlled you becomes the voice you hear when you try to pray. The congregation that rejected you becomes the jury you imagine when you picture heaven's gates. That tangling is the real injury. The human failure and the divine relationship got fused together in a single wound, and nobody taught you how to separate them. So you stopped praying, or you pray but it feels like talking to a wall. You open your Bible, and the verses that used to comfort you now remind you of the person who weaponized them against you. Worship music comes on the radio, and your chest tightens instead of lifting. These reactions make perfect sense. Your heart is protecting itself the only way it knows how. But here's what that protective reflex actually costs you. It hands the person who hurt you the keys to your eternity. Think about that. The leader who abused trust, the member who spread gossip, the community that turned its back. They already took your peace. Are you going to let them take your God too? David understood this collision between human failure and divine faithfulness. In Psalm 55, verses 12 through 14, he writes, "If an enemy were insulting me, I could hide. But it is you, a man like myself, my companion, my close friend, with whom I once enjoyed sweet fellowship at the house of God." David names it precisely. The betrayal that cuts deepest comes from inside the fellowship, inside the house of worship, from someone who sat beside you and sang the same songs. David didn't sanitize his prayer. He poured out rage, grief, confusion, and God received every word. The psalm doesn't end with David pretending the hurt didn't matter. It ends with David choosing to cast his burden on the Lord anyway, in verse 22, while the wound is still fresh and the betrayer is still breathing. That's the model. You bring the mess, God holds it. Maybe you've been waiting to heal before you approach God again. Waiting until the bitterness fades, until you can walk into a sanctuary without your stomach knotting, until you feel worthy of worship. That waiting is built on a lie, the lie that you need to arrive clean. The gospel says the opposite. You come broken, bleeding, furious, and God meets you in that exact condition. Jesus didn't die for people who had their theology sorted and their emotions under control. He died while you were still in the wreckage. Romans 5-8 makes that timing explicit. God demonstrates His own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While, during, in the middle of. Your church hurt doesn't disqualify you from that love. Nothing does. But something harder needs to be said, and it would be dishonest to skip it. Some of you aren't just hurt. You're angry at God directly. You prayed for protection, and the abuse continued. You trusted His people because He told you to, and they destroyed you. You did everything right, served faithfully, tithed, showed up, submitted to leadership, and got burned for it. The anger toward the people has bled into anger toward the one who supposedly oversees them. That anger is valid, and expressing it to God is one of the most biblical things you can do. The Psalms are filled with accusations hurled at heaven. Psalm 22 opens with, my God, why have you forsaken me?" The same words Jesus cried from the cross. If the Son of God can scream that question at the Father, you have permission to bring yours. God is secure enough to absorb your fury. He'd rather have your honest rage than your polished silence. Now, someone might push back here. If God is sovereign, why did He let it happen? Why place me in that church, under that leader, in that community? Fair question. And the honest answer is that sovereignty doesn't mean God orchestrated your abuse. He gave humans freedom, and some humans use that freedom to crush others, even inside His house. Jesus warned about this directly in Matthew 7:15. Watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ferocious wolves. He warned because he knew wolves would infiltrate. The existence of wolves in the church doesn't invalidate the shepherd. It confirms that Jesus knew exactly what his church would face and spoke truth about it in advance. Your pain proves his warning was accurate. Your survival proves his hand was on you even when his people's hands were against you. There's a critical distinction that church hurt tries to erase: the difference between God and God's people. Churches are made of humans. Humans fail. Some fail spectacularly, some fail maliciously, some fail while genuinely believing they're doing God's work. The institution can be corrupted, the community can become toxic, leadership can become predatory. All of these failures belong to the human side of the equation. God doesn't change because his representatives misrepresented him. Malachi 3-6, "I the Lord do not change." The character of God remains constant even when the character of his church collapses. You experienced a church. You may not have experienced God in that church at all, and the absence of God's character in a place that bore his name is an indictment of that place, not of him. So what does rebuilding actually look like? Because just go back to church is terrible advice for someone with deep wounds, and stay away forever hands your abuser a permanent victory. The path forward runs through the middle, and it's slower than either extreme. Start with God alone. Before any building, any congregation, any worship team or small group, rebuild the private connection. Open your Bible in your living room. Sit with a single verse for a week if that's all you can manage. Pray ugly prayers. God, I'm not sure I trust you right now, but I'm here. That prayer has more faith in it than 1,000 rehearsed Sunday mornings. You're showing up to a relationship that terrifies you. That takes courage most churchgoers never have to summon. Then, slowly, test the waters with discernment you didn't have before. Your church hurt gave you something valuable buried inside the pain: the ability to recognize manipulation, spiritual abuse, and false authority. You can spot the red flags now: the leader who demands unquestioning loyalty, the community that punishes honest questions, the theology that uses guilt as a leash. You see these patterns because you lived inside them. That discernment is a gift forged in fire. Use it. When you're ready, and only when you're ready, look for a community that welcomes your questions instead of fearing them. A place where doubt is treated as the growing edge of faith rather than evidence of spiritual failure. These communities exist. They're often small, often imperfect, often less polished than the one that hurt you. But they hold space for the wounded, because most of the people in them arrived wounded too. Hebrews 10:24-25 encourages believers to gather together, but notice the purpose it gives: to spur one another on toward love and good deeds, encouraging one another. The gathering exists to encourage, to build up. When a gathering consistently tears down, it has abandoned its biblical purpose. Walking away from that is obedience, not rebellion. And if you never find a church that feels safe, God is still yours. Your relationship with Christ was never contingent on a membership roster. The thief on the cross beside Jesus never attended a single service, never tithed, never sat through a sermon. Jesus looked at him and said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Luke 23:43, access to God has always been direct, always personal. A church can enhance that connection. A church should enhance it, but a church cannot be the gatekeeper of it. The enemy's strategy in church hurt is elegant in its cruelty. He uses the very thing designed to draw you closer to God as the weapon that drives you away. And every day you stay in the distance, believing you're disqualified, believing God is like the people who failed you, that strategy succeeds. Your healing begins the moment you separate the two. God is God, people are people. The cross stands independent of every human institution built around it. You carry scars from a place that was supposed to be safe. Those scars are real and they matter, but they belong to a chapter, not to your whole story. The same hands that were wounded by nails understand exactly what it means to be hurt by the people you came to save. Bring him the bitterness you've been carrying. He already knows its weight. He's been waiting, patiently, without condemnation, for you to stop confusing his voice with the voices that damaged you. They sound nothing alike, and the moment you let him speak for himself again, you'll hear the difference.